Hello and welcome to FSA Guaranteed Loans. This webinar is a project of Moses and FSA, the Farm Service Agency. My name is Lauren Langworthy and I'm the Program Director here at Moses. In this webinar, we're going to be talking about the different types of guaranteed loans available through FSA, what that means, if you might be eligible for them, and how they can be used. So let's get started. Let's start by talking a little bit about FSA. FSA stands for the Farm Service Agency. They're responsible for quite a few different programs, including crop reporting, Conservation Reserve Program, also known as CRP, organic cost share, and loans. We're going to be focusing on the loans today, specifically the guaranteed loans. So let's talk about that just a little bit. FSA is known as the lender of first opportunity. That means that they're a good first stop or first rung for farmers trying to step up the ladder of being able to access commercial credit. FSA supports farmers as they strengthen their farm businesses, but they also have a goal of helping them eventually access commercial lending on their own. We've already talked a little bit about direct loans in webinar 1, but we're going to talk just a little bit about the difference between a direct and a guaranteed loan, and then really dig into these guaranteed loans in this webinar. There are a few different types of FSA guaranteed loans. They include farm ownership loans, farm operating loans, land contract guarantees, and conservation loans. Now, the loans offered by FSA fall into two main categories, direct loans and guaranteed loans. So the direct loans, let's look at that just a little bit. They are granted and serviced by FSA. It's sort of interesting because that money is actually, it comes through the Farm Bill appropriations, through the USDA budget, into FSA and out to farmers. And FSA then grants those loans. They go through the whole application and approval process. They'll service the loans throughout the life of the loan, and you'll have an FSA loan officer who works with you. So really, FSA becomes a one-stop shop for those direct loans. And in webinar 1, we talk a lot about those direct loans. So if you're interested in them, please watch that other webinar. The guaranteed loans, however, are a little bit more complicated. FSA is actually providing a guarantee to a commercial or private lender in order to help eligible farmers access those options. So if you have applied for a commercial loan in the past and you've been denied, you could potentially contact that lender again and say, would you be interested in doing an FSA guaranteed loan? They might not know what it is. You might have to educate them a little bit, but generally a guarantee means that FSA is backing you. So what they're doing is saying, if this farmer does not pay off their bill, we will be responsible for it. Of course, that also means they would own whatever you bought with it. So it's important to understand that there would be a lien on your property in relation to these guarantees. But it's a worthwhile thing for some people to look into depending on your situation. Many of the different loans at FSA have both a direct and a guaranteed variety, but not all of them. And again, we just went through that list a moment ago of which ones do have the guarantee. I also wanted to just cover really quickly that there is an EZ guarantee program. So this is basically a smaller option for you getting into a guaranteed loan. It's available for smaller loans, loan applications up to $100,000, and it's designed to help small, new, or underserved family farmers with early financial assistance for their farm. It provides a simplified application process, which might be nice. FSA's loan application process is pretty intense, and if you're a little averse to that, this might be a nice way to get through that quickly. The lenders only need to submit one application form per loan request, and it can contain all the information. And generally, you won't need other supporting documents unless your situation is unusual. And we'll go a little bit more in depth into the application process in a moment here, but I just wanted to point out this Easy Guarantee program. All the other eligibility and purpose and security and all those other requirements would be the same. It's just the application process that would be a little bit easier, and then again that loan limit would be a little smaller for these. So let's look at this, the structure and funding of these guaranteed loans. Um, the commercial lender, I'm going to use that term a little bit loosely, but it could be any one of the following: a commercial bank, a credit union, a state program, or a private lender, which might include the seller. And that commercial lender will be providing the servicing and the funding for the loan. Farm Service Agency, or FSA, will guarantee the losses to that lender up to 95% for all eligible loan applicants. So if you're interested in pursuing one of these applications, one of these guaranteed loans, I would recommend talking with FSA about your plan to make sure that you will be eligible. Now let's talk about the process just a little bit. How would you go about actually getting one of these guaranteed loans? Well, with guaranteed loans, the lender is FSA's customer, not the loan applicant, which is you. So the guaranteed loans are actually the responsibility of the lender. That means if you go to XYZ Bank and you want to get a guaranteed loan, the loan that you get from XYZ Bank is you are the customer and XYZ is the lender. And it is their responsibility to cover your costs, your service your loan. FSA would then guarantee XYZ Bank, and XYZ Bank would become the customer of FSA. And FSA's responsibility would be to manage their relationship with XYZ. So I hope that makes some sense. The lender and the loan applicant will start by completing an application for guarantee and submitting that to FSA. Again, I would recommend connecting with FSA before you actually submit an application, just to make sure that you fully understand what you're doing and you know that you will probably be eligible, and you've been able to just bounce it off someone who knows more about these programs. Then, after that application has been submitted, an FSA Farm Loan Officer will review the application, and if the request is approved by FSA, hopefully it is, then an FSA Service Center will issue the lender a conditional commitment, and that will outline the terms of the guarantee that FSA is offering the lender. The loan may then be closed at any time by the lender, and maybe if you're hoping for advanced funds, those will come through, but funds can become available to the applicant, which would be you, and then the FSA Service Center will issue the guarantee after those funds have been released. The lender then can make the loan and service the loan to its conclusion, and hopefully that's the end of the story. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. But in the event the lender suffers a loss, meaning you weren't able to make your payments, FSA will reimburse the lender according to the specifics of their guarantee, which we covered earlier, that guarantee that they would issue. So that's generally how this all lays out, and it's pretty straightforward, but you don't have to do a whole lot of work with FSA beyond maybe checking in with them first to make sure that this all would make sense so that you don't end up halfway through a process that you won't be eligible for. So speaking about eligibility, let's talk about that just a little bit. You need to apply to a lender who is willing to work with an FSA guarantee. So there is a list of a bunch of different lenders that are currently working with FSA on their FSA website. So you can certainly look at that and see if there's anyone that you would like to work with. You could also contact your office, your local FSA office, and ask them about local lenders who might be open to obtaining a guarantee through FSA. And beyond that, if you are hoping to access one of these guarantees and you haven't found someone through either of those realms, you can always go to a lender and talk them through the process and see if they would be open to an FSA guarantee. Now, in order to be eligible for these guarantees, you need to meet this list of requirements here, these eligibility requirements. So I'll just read through them quickly here. Citizen of the United States or legal resident alien, including Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and certain former Pacific Trust territories. Now, if that isn't clear to you where you fall on that map, then I would recommend reaching out to FSA and making sure that you would meet that eligibility requirement. Also, you'll need to have an acceptable credit history as determined by the lender. Now, that's a little bit different than the direct loans, where FSA determines your credit history and whether or not it's acceptable. In this situation, it's that lender, that XYZ bank or whoever that you might be working with, that will be determining whether or not your credit history is acceptable to them. Next, we have the legal capacity to incur responsibility for the loan obligation. Then, be unable to obtain a loan without an FSA guarantee. So that means that you've actually tried to access commercial lending already and you've been turned down. So you'll want to check in with that, make sure that you meet that requirement. You cannot have caused FSA a financial loss by receiving debt forgiveness on more than 3 occasions prior to April 4th, 1996, or any occasion after April 4th, 1996, on either an FSA direct or guarantee loan. So long story short, if you've had issues with non-repayment of an FSA loan or debt forgiveness issues, that will be something that you need to talk to FSA about and make sure that either that's in the past or doesn't necessarily meet these the language of this requirement. Next, you have to be the owner, operator, or tenant operator of a family farm after the loan is closed. So that means that you will need to be living on the farm and running the farm in order to access these loans. And there's a little bit of a note there in italics. For a farm ownership loan, the producer also needs to own the farm. So if you're looking at a farm ownership loan, then a tenant operator situation won't work. You'll need to be an owner operator. That's what that means. You furthermore cannot be delinquent on any federal debt, and conservation loan applicants, this is another little note, do not have to meet the quote-unquote family farm definition, nor do they have to be unable to obtain a loan without an FSA guarantee. All the other eligibility requirements must be met. So that means that if you don't fit the definition of a family farm, you can still apply for a conservation loan. And also, you don't have to have had issues accessing commercial credit. So you could potentially go to a bank and access a commercial line of credit in order to use one of these conservation loans, or you can also get an FSA guarantee. That option is up to you. So let's look at the limitations of these loans just a little bit. The amount is adjusted annually with each fiscal year based on inflation. So this number could change depending on when you're watching this webinar, but in the spring of 2017, the FSA guarantees these loans up to these amounts. And so you can look at that for a moment, and hopefully when you are watching this webinar, those loan limitations are somewhere in the same ballpark and haven't gone down or up significantly. But check the FSA website to see the current loan limitations so that you make sure you know what you're expecting. Now let's talk a little bit about the interests and terms. The interest rates and eligibility on these guaranteed loans are actually negotiated between the lender and the borrower. They have to meet certain FSA benchmarks, but FSA is not actually dictating the rate and eligibility requirements completely. The terms will also vary based on the life of the security offered. So that just means if you're putting in something very long-term and permanent onto your farm, that will probably have a longer lifespan to it and a longer life of security. Whereas if you are looking at something very short-term, let's just use the example of a seed bill or something like that, you will be recovering those costs really quickly. And so the life of that loan will probably be much shorter than if you were, for example, putting in a new building or buying breeding stock. So let's look at these really quickly. With a conservation loan, that term cannot exceed 30 years according to FSA. It must be fully secured, and only those who have the ability to repay will be able to access that conservation loan. So that's just important to understand. You'll need to meet those 3 requirements. Next, we have the operating loan. These are normally repaid within 7 years. Some of them will be paid more on the 12 to 18 month timeline, but they'll have to be paid within 7 years. Farm ownership loans cannot exceed 40 years. So you'll be negotiating the exact timeline with your lender, but you cannot exceed 40 years. And advances on operating lines of credit must be paid within 7 years of a loan guaranteed date. So that's a quick overview of that. Now let's talk about these loans a little bit more in depth. We'll start with the guaranteed farm ownership loan. These loans are designed to help farmers and ranchers purchase a new a new farm, or add to their current farm or ranch. They can also be used to construct or improve existing buildings and facilities, pay closing costs, cover soil and water conservation and protection. But really, they're built to help farmers and ranchers who have difficulty accessing credit grow or improve their farm business. And generally, you can look at that purchasing a new or adding on to a current farm or ranch. And it's important to note that these cannot be used to refinance property that you already own. So if you already own a farm, you won't be able to use this loan to refinance it. But if you're interested in buying that hayfield over at the neighbors that's going up for sale this year, then this might be an option for you. Now, with these farm ownership loan, the guaranteed farm ownership loans, you'll need to meet certain eligibility requirements. They're only available to eligible farmers or ranchers, only available for an eligible farm or ranch operation, which means that if you are raising agricultural products for an agricultural market, for example, raising corn to sell into the commodity system, or raising vegetables that you're selling direct to consumers, or raising livestock for milk or meat, you're probably an eligible farm or ranch operation. However, if you are raising exotic fish or tropical birds or horses for racing, something like that, something that won't be used for food or fuel or fiber, then you might not be an eligible farm or ranch. So if you have questions about that, talk to FSA, but it hopefully is fairly straightforward. Also, you'll need to have farm management experience. The requirements for these farm ownership loans are heavier requirements than other FSA loans have. So you will need to have spent at least 3 of the last 10 years in management and business, basically decision making on a farm or ranch. And the repayment terms for these have a maximum repayment period of 40 years. Next, let's talk a little bit about the guaranteed farm operating loan. These are used to start, maintain, or strengthen a farm or ranch. They can cover costs that are essential to the success of a farming operation. For example, costs associated with reorganizing to improve profitability. An example of that might be if you were selling primarily commodity crops into the commodity market and feeling like if you started raising specialty crops, you would be able to improve your profitability. You might need some new infrastructure in order to deal with that change in operation. So you'd have to get your numbers together and make sure that you can show it will improve your profitability, but you could take that to FSA and get a farm operating loan potentially. They can also cover the purchase of livestock, farm equipment, operating expenses that might include seed or fertilizer or any number of operating costs. And it can also cover minor improvements or repairs to buildings. And it might be able to refinance certain farm-related debts, but non-real estate. So if you have a question about that, you should talk to FSA. They can talk you through your specific situation, but that there is the potential that these loans can help refinance certain debts if they're not real estate debts. Also, they can be used for land and water development, use and conservation, or for loan closing and borrower training costs. Some of the loans will actually have training requirements built into them, and if you need to cover those costs, you can use one of these farm operating loans to do that. So that's just a little overview of the different ways these loans can be used, but they're very flexible and have a lot of options. So if you have a project in mind, I would recommend talking to FSA about your project and making sure that it would be eligible under their view of the program. And then with the eligibility for these farm operating loans, you'll need to meet that eligible farm enterprise that we talked about earlier, and you'll also need to meet those general eligibility requirements that we talked about at the very beginning. You'll also need farm management experience, but it's not as hefty as the farm management experience required for a farm ownership loan. So you can just be prepared to talk about your education, about your on-farm training, and about your farm management experience in order to meet that requirement. There are also land contract guarantees. This is another type of loan. These can be used to basically provide a financial guarantee to the seller of a farm or ranch. So it needs to be sold in a land contract sale, and it needs to be sold to a beginning or socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher. So beginning farmer or rancher means 10 years or less, and the socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher definition generally includes women and minority groups. So that gives you a little bit of a clue into what that bullet point means there, but we'll need to make sure that it is a land contract sale to one of those groups. Now, just to be clear, you don't have to be both a beginner farmer as well as a socially disadvantaged farmer, but you need to be one or the other. And these land contract guarantees have two different types. There's a prompt payment guarantee, and there's a standard guarantee. The prompt payment guarantee provides guaranteed income source for the seller, and it covers the combined costs of three different things. That's 3 amortized annual installments, related real estate taxes, and related insurance. And that 3 amortized annual installments is a little bit complex, but if you have questions about exactly what that means, you can certainly talk with FSA or another lender. You can also look into the definition of amortized and learn a little bit more about it, because it is sort of a complex process making that calculation. The seller must use a third-party escrow agent as well. So those are the requirements for that prompt payment guarantee. The standard guarantee is a little bit more straightforward. This just guarantees the value of the real estate. And FSA will cover up to 90% of the outstanding principal of the balance covered. So let's say you are selling a farm through a land contract sale to one of these beginning or socially disadvantaged farmer or ranchers, and for some reason they are no longer able to make payments. Well, this guarantee will swoop in and cover up to 90% of the remaining principal balance. Again, you need to use a third-party servicing agent for this, but if you are hoping to transfer your land to the next generation or to someone else, I guess it doesn't have to be a next generation necessarily, but that's a pretty common use for these. This is a great way to make sure that you have a little bit of protection as the seller in that land contract situation. So it can be a really good fit for certain scenarios. Next up, we'll talk about this guaranteed conservation loan. The guaranteed conservation loan is designed to promote conservation practices on farms or ranches. And specifically, it's built to support farmers who want to implement conservation practices, but are having an issue with the upfront funds. Many of the NRCS programs, Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, programs work on a reimbursement rate. And so you can use these guaranteed conservation loans as an upfront cash flow, and then NRCS will reimburse, and you can use that to repay. We have a little bit more information on these loans in webinar 1, but the important thing to understand is that you'll need to have an NRCS approved conservation plan. Specific practices that are listed through FSA that can be covered by this include installing conservation structures, establishing forest cover, installing water conservation measures, establishing or improving permanent pastures, transitioning to organic production, managing manure, which includes manure digesters, or adapting other emerging or existing conservation techniques, practices, or technologies. So that's a fairly broad definition, but basically you'll need to work with NRCS to get a conservation plan in place. And then you can certainly look into these loans. The requirements, as I just said, are that you'll need to have an NRCS conservation plan and you'll need to have an eligible conservation practice. The term for these conservation loans are adjusted for inflation frequently, so I can't give you an exact number, but you can look on the FSA website to see the current adjustment for these loans. And the interest rates and the terms specifics are going to be negotiated with your lender within some FSA benchmarks. So you'll want to be in communication with both your lender and with FSA in order to make sure that you will meet these requirements. Also, it's worth mentioning in these guaranteed conservation loans that there is a streamlined CL application process. This application process, this streamlined process, is built to reduce the paperwork requirements, and it's basically set up for those who are in a strong financial position. And it eliminates the cash flow statement requirement. It also eliminates supplementary documentation requirements. But in order to be able to access this streamlined application process, you need to be in a financial position, which includes that you must be current on payments to all creditors. You must have a debt to asset ratio of 40% or less. You need to have a minimum FICO score of 700, and you need to have a net worth of at least 3 times the loan amount. Meaning, if you were asking for a loan of $5,000, your net worth would have to be at least $15,000, which would be 3 times that $5,000. So while this application process, this streamlined process, won't be available for everyone, for people who do meet those requirements, it is nice to just be able to eliminate a little bit of the cash flow statement and supplementary documentation required for these loans. So it's good to know about that opportunity. I just wanted to bring up one more time this FSA webpage. It's a great place to find additional information. So you can see right there, www.fsa.usda.gov. You can go to Programs and Services, and then to Farm Loan Programs, and then follow up with the Guaranteed Farm Loans link. And that will give you information in depth on all of these different loans that I've just described. Also, you'll see that little red arrow there is pointing to the button State Offices. I put this up just to point out that that's a direct link for you to find your local FSA office. You can also go back through the USDA website and find your local NRCS office. Frequently, FSA and USDA will be housed in the same facility, not always, but frequently. So that's a great way to get started on either those conservation loans or any of these other guaranteed loans. You can also contact FSA with questions about direct loans or about any of the eligibility that we've discussed. So it's just important to know that you can find that information online anytime, as well as rates and terms for direct loans and other supplemental information. Also, with the guaranteed loans, when you're reaching out to a lender who may not be familiar with FSA, they do have a whole lender packet available on the FSA website that could help that lender understand better what's expected of them and what they can expect. So thank you very much for participating in today's webinar. I hope that you are able to leave this webinar with a better understanding of what FSA guaranteed loans are and how you can access them. And please feel free to download the worksheets that are available on the Moses website that go with these webinars and help you organize your thoughts a little bit more before you step on to the next phase. We wish you luck and happy financing for your farm. Thank you.